2021 was another strange year for video games. Considering the ongoing state of the world, a surprising amount of great games were still released. Like in previous years, I'll be going through each of the games I finished in order of favorite to least favorite, and I'll be excluding remasters and remakes that don't have major additions or changes to the gameplay. I also wasn't able to finish every game, so like in 2019, I'll be highlighting some of my initial impressions of a few games. On that note, here are my favorite video games of 2021. Overall, Metroid Dread is my favorite game of the year. As the first brand new 2D Metroid game in almost 20 years, it met or exceeded most of my expectations. I really enjoyed its balance of the exploration of Super Metroid with the focused design of games like Metroid Fusion. While it heavily focuses on the gameplay, I also enjoyed Dread's atmosphere and subtle storytelling. Outside of the complexity of the controls, and the amount of damage that Samus takes from enemy attacks, I thoroughly enjoyed Metroid Dread, and it's one of my favorite games in the series. As the final entry in the modern trilogy, Hitman 3 builds upon the story and gameplay mechanics of the previous games in interesting ways. Each mission still features several ways to reach and eliminate assassination targets, but there's less guidance, with a greater emphasis on experimentation and exploration. The levels also have more direct story connections than in the previous games, and aside from the linearity of certain sequences, the focus on the narrative results in a satisfying conclusion to a fantastic trilogy. While I really liked Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, I also found it slightly disappointing. The visual design is superb, with incredible graphics and smooth performance. The gameplay was also great, and felt like a natural evolution of the previous games. Even though I liked the characters and dialogue, the story itself felt predictable and underwhelming. For the most part, Rift Apart was very fun, and is one of the most visually impressive games of the year, but I found it less engaging than some of the older games in the series. As someone who struggled with earlier entries, I'm really enjoying Guilty Gear Strive. It's felt more accessible because of its reworked gameplay mechanics and extensive tutorials. It's also visually impressive, with a distinct graphical style and animation quality. Aside from the cumbersome lobby system, the online multiplayer is mostly solid, but the single-player options feel a bit lacking. The non-interactive story was also entertaining, but confusing as a casual fan of the series. For the most part, Strive has been very enjoyable, and I'm excited for future characters and updates. Included with the Nintendo Switch re-release of Super Mario 3D World, Bowser's Fury was an entertaining bonus game. The open-world structure and the concept of Fury Bowser are interesting, but don't feel fully realized. The controls are somewhat limited, the amount of objective types is relatively small, and the reliance on Fury Bowser results in waiting for events to happen. It's also very short, but Bowser's Fury is still a fun attempt at an open-world Mario game. The only indie game I finished from this year was Sumire, a short adventure game about coping with loss and trying to live a perfect day. Its gameplay is relatively simple, but the focus is its characters and emotional story. Multiple playthroughs are also encouraged, with several optional quests and different choices that greatly affect the story. Outside of a few dark scenes, I really enjoyed Sumire because of its impactful themes and engaging characters. While I don't have much nostalgia for the Nintendo 64, Mario Party Superstars was a pleasant surprise. Even though it only features returning boards from the first 3 games, each board feels unique with additional elements from the later games. I also enjoyed most of the returning minigames, but some of the inclusions are questionable. Outside of the small number of boards and a few frustrating minigames, Mario Party Superstars is incredibly charming and fun, and it's my favorite game in the series in over a decade. Even though I never played the original, new Pokemon Snap was still enjoyable. With the concept of taking photos of Pokemon in different environments, it's simple but very charming. While most stages must be played multiple times to advance the story, it's still fun to search for new Pokemon in earlier stages, and take better photos for higher scores. Aside from some cryptic objectives, new Pokemon Snap is a very relaxing and pleasant experience. Despite its underwhelming launch, Mario Golf Super Rush was still fun for the most part. The story mode felt underdeveloped, and the speed golf and battle golf modes were a bit too hectic at times, but I really liked the standard golf gameplay. Additional courses, characters, and modes have been added over time, so the game now feels a bit more complete. While Super Rush is a flawed game, I still think it's enjoyable. Lastly, WarioWare Get It Together was fun, but overcomplicated. Since multiple characters take turns to complete various microgames, certain challenges are difficult to complete while adjusting to each character's controls, and certain characters are poorly suited for specific microgames. The presentation was also less charming than the previous games, since there were fewer cutscenes and less voice acting. To some extent, I still liked Get It Together, but the new control style conflicts with the fast-paced format of the series. Next up are a few games I tried but haven't finished, starting with the Great Ace Attorney Adventures. Previously released only in Japan, this spin-off features a new cast and historical setting. While the gameplay is very similar to the previous games, it's still really enjoyable. Because each case has been surprisingly long, I've only completed the first 2 episodes, but I'm really liking it so far, and I'm already invested in its characters and story. Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139 is a remaster of a Japan-only version of the original Nier. Along with redone visuals and audio, this version also features reworked gameplay and new story content. While the movement and combat are much more fluid, the story progression is mostly unchanged, and feels a bit outdated because of frequent backtracking. Even though the gameplay is somewhat tedious, the characters and setting have been engaging. Finally, Persona 5 Strikers has been enjoyable, but a bit disappointing. Compared to Persona 5, the story and characters haven't been as engaging. I also think the gameplay of Dynasty Warriors doesn't work well with some of Persona's mechanics, like having limited SP for Persona's abilities. Strikers is still fun as a Persona 5 spin-off and as a Warriors game, but I wasn't very invested in its story and gameplay. Overall, 2021 was another solid year for video game releases, and there are quite a few games I haven't played yet, including Psychonauts 2, Chicory: A Colorful Tale, and Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker. To some extent, I've liked every new game I've tried, but fewer games stood out to me. I also didn't enjoy gaming as much, because of fatigue from the ongoing problems in the industry, and from the state of the world. So far, 2022 seems like a promising year for video games. Right now, my most anticipated games are Splatoon 3, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and Tunic. I'm still expecting a lot of games to be delayed, but I'm hoping games like the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Sonic Frontiers release in 2022. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, stay safe, and thank you for watching.